And here we are, the second to last episode of this little retrospective project I did, and the final detour game I wanted to cover. I originally wasn't going to include Lamplight City in this series, but after playing it, I eventually realized I had to cover it. Francisco Gonzalez didn't work with Wadjet for this game, but it feels like an evolution of his previous A Golden Wake that he did with help from the studio. Leaving it out didn't seem right, so I figured I'd go over it before getting into Unavowed, even though it came out second. Where Unavowed is more experimental with the point-and-click genre, Lamplight City remains very traditional, instead improves upon the investigator formula by simplifying certain mechanics and making the larger narrative structure far more complex than I think anyone was expecting. The game takes place in an alternate steampunk timeline in the 1840s, where America is still under British rule and the Industrial Revolution has come via steam technology. You play as Miles Fordham, a detective who loses his job after his partner Bill is killed on a burglary case. Since the horrible event, Miles has started to hear Bill in his head to the point of sleeplessness, needing to drug himself to even rest. Bill says that he can't move on until Miles finds the man who killed him, and Miles eventually agrees to do so. What happens from there depends on your ability to solve cases under the nose of your old department. The best way I can describe the game is that it takes the basic structure of LA Noire with the action bits removed, the mechanics of the likes of Gabriel Knight in the Blackwell games, and removes any semblance of traditional point-and-click puzzle-solving structure. The whole game is sliced up into 6 different cases that each take place over a span of a day, with the opening burglary case acting as a sort of prologue and tutorial, and every case after being a fairly complex challenge to figure out. You explore the city through a simple world map screen, talk with people, find clues, pick up the odd item that can help you out, and eventually piece together possibilities of who did what. What's interesting is that there's no unnaturally occurring end state for a case. Instead, you have to report in once you have a suspect to finger them as a perp, and it is in this process that the game shows a level of openness I haven't seen in a modern point-and-click in a very long time. The key to this openness is that you can fail just about every case and quite easily.
This Arthur Devon's Joker is bad news. Not only is he making threats to the Harris family, he also has the nerve to send a ransom note. We have enough evidence to pin the crime on him, I think. The police can deal with the headache of actually finding the baby.
Most investigation-style games generally guide you along a certain path, going to an ending or a set of endings saved for the very end to pick out, like most point-and-clicks out there. Lamplight City instead wants you to think like a detective and face the consequences of failure, complete with bad endings and branching moments that have unexpected effects on later cases. For example, if you don't perfectly solve the second full case of the game, the final case plays out completely different. The first 2 cases hold your hand a bit by offering logical endpoints for the case through dramatic reveals, but cases 3 and 4 subvert this. From there on, picking out the culprit becomes less obvious, and you need to pay good attention to figure out the true criminal and avoid putting the blame on an innocent party. You can't simply fumble your way through puzzles to continue the game. You have to think carefully over the facts you have. As a result, the game removes almost all traditional puzzles from the proceedings altogether and benefits greatly from it. The pacing becomes almost addictive as a result. Like a good book, you want to keep reading even after the end of a chapter. As I discovered in my second replay as I breezed through the first 4 cases again in less than 24 hours. The structure is similar to a Golden Wake, but it works better here since you're more emotionally invested in play itself. Where a Golden Wake had you mainly as a member of an audience watching this story of this one man and dealing with a few bits of gameplay before you move to the next historical cameo. The cases in Lamplight City are so compelling on their own that they let the player properly step into the world and feel like their actions are making a significant difference, and they are. In fact, the choices you make during a case can sometimes lock you out of entire investigative branches, which can in turn sometimes lock you out of finding the real culprit or understanding the full picture, which can ruin your case. The illusion isn't easily shattered either. Unlike Telltale's over-reliance on formulas that only make a handful of choices significant, or Dave Gilbert's focus on fairly linear story structure, Francisco Gonzalez uses the basic win or lose vocabulary games to decide outcomes. Cases have an impressive number of branching points with various different leads and theories that follow, with everyone holding secrets of their own. However, what secrets are important to know in your case is where things get complex, with certain actions and ideas locked until you naturally reach a certain point where that action makes logical sense. For the first playthrough, the game is utterly engrossing, and there's still a good chance you'll miss entire branches of inquiry. It wasn't until I checked an achievement guide that I discovered there was an entire character and line of questioning in the second case I had no idea existed. It's strange that Unavowed took mostly from RPGs because Lamplight City feels like the stronger role-playing experience in terms of truly playing into your given role. Francisco Gonzalez can be credited with the majority of the game's development, including writing, design, art, animation, programming, sound design, voiceover direction, some lip-sync direction, and even some lyrical work for the game's amazing ending theme, Down Among the Dead Men, which I should add was actually recorded in a real cathedral just to get the right acoustics. He puts his all into this game, really involving his own style, publicly saying that this was the first time he liked how one of his games looked. I think he can be put on the same level as Ben Chandler as of now in terms of polish and graphical design, though Gonzalez and Chandler have a few differences in their styles. Where Chandler works great with color contrast and expressive sprites, Gonzalez is better at creating places that somehow feel real instead of fantastical, using more muted color tones and taking heavily from classic architecture and art styles. This goes for his character portraits, which are more realistic than exaggerated. The game is simply a delight to just look at, while animation is obviously limited, there is one show-off moment involving getting a gun out of a drain where it seems like Mr. Gonzalez tried his hand at some sort of rotoscoping technique. A nice touch.
Detective work is a dirty job, but someone has to do it. Don't forget to roll up your sleeve.
I really hope there's something down there. Ugh, this is almost as bad as the time I had to search for that stolen necklace in a pile of horse manure.
I'm really glad I didn't draw the short straw in that case. Well, how about that?
A shame the police managed to overlook this.
Composition was handled by Mark Bennis, who previously helped with a collection of Pokemon piano arrangements, and is currently helping develop an upcoming indie title called The Worst Grim Reaper. His work is difficult to talk about because it's the type of music that mainly works in the context of a given scene, not the sort of thing you listen to outside of the game, but there's no denying that it works for building atmosphere here. The most significant other name outside the voice cast is Shelley Smith-Shenroy, who once again does work as a casting director, while also playing a handful of characters. Due to the large cast, most every voice actor has handled several roles, including old familiar names like Gabe Goldfarb and Andy Klemko. Miles is played by Ben Britton, the voice of Gus from Shardlight, and Bill is handled by newcomer Al Pagano. Both of them kick on knocking the respective roles out of the park. Britton gives Miles a weary and believable voice, while Pagano gives Bill an impossible-to-hate, smarmy sense of humor.
Ashes to ashes and all that. Glad I was buried. Cremation always seemed a bit too hot to handle.
Now's not the time for jokes, Bill.
Are you serious? Death is the best time for jokes. Otherwise, it's all just a bunch of boo-hoo-hoo this and wow-wow-wow that. And trust me, there's plenty of that in life. Hell, you'd know better than anyone.
All right, just shut it for a bit while I look over the crime scene, would you? I need to concentrate.
I don't think Desiree will be able to give us a hand with this investigation.
Bill?
What? I thought it was funny.
Pagano also plays double duty as Bill's killer in a clever bit of theme and character play, giving his incredibly threatening voice that instantly makes the characters stand out as they absolutely should.
Come on, all you've really done is taken some flowers. You're not a killer. Don't make things worse for yourself.
You don't know anything about me. But one thing's for sure. I'm not going to jail. So let me go free, or else your partner is going over the side.
All this polished and well thought out design is great, but what makes the game truly work is Gonzalez's writing. Lamplight City is sort of a character study in tragedy in the same way a Golden Wake was, though instead of a focus on ego destroying the life of a talented man, it shifts to exploring how people deal with grief and loss. Miles' story is really about finding closure for himself and Bill, and how that desire for closure and bringing an end to this terrible chapter in his life is running him ragged. He becomes an addict trying to stop Bill's voice, straining his marriage and even damage his ability to solve cases. As someone who deals with addiction temptations myself and having seen how it can destroy a person firsthand, Miles' illogical actions make a disturbing amount of sense to me, wanting desperately to deal with something that's beyond his own control, filling a hole in self-destructive ways. The moment that really cemented just how well thought out the story is to me was after the third case, where Miles is talking with a bartender about a science fiction story he read. The player can select the details, like the gender of the inventor and why they did the act they eventually do, but the story in every version comes down to someone becoming obsessed over losing someone and trying to bring them back in some way. What they manage to create is not their loved one, however, but, quote, "This dissembling mechanism hath nuffed the final breath of whom I loved. It is not him. I have formed a faint mocking shadow what is forever lost," unquote. Miles says he connects with the story deeply. It's not hard to see why. Bill is his dissembling mechanism, not making it clear if Bill is real or not, but cementing that Miles sees him as his own punishment, a constant reminder of his failures that are driving him to an abyss.
That's one hell of a story, Miles.
As I said, it resonated with me quite deeply.
Same here. I can tell you, I'm glad that ethericity crap hasn't been discovered, or else this sort of thing won't just be in stories. You mark my words.
Yes, I suppose that's one way of interpreting it.
The game's world building is top-notch, exploring themes of racism, sexism, toxic masculinity, class divide, income inequality, the cost of technological progress, and much more, but it all comes down to a very human story about someone unable to deal with traumatic loss. The reason solving cases plays such a large role in the story is that you can give people something both Bill and Miles wanted at the start of the first case: closure. The game is ultimately about the need to move on, with even the main antagonist later revealed as a tragic figure who couldn't deal with their grief and pain. To be our best self, we cannot let our past pain define and rule us, even if it's difficult to not let that happen. Our own personal salvation may only come from being able to help others find theirs, the game seems to argue, and I feel like that's a message worth taking to heart.